The NRA began to ramp up its congressional contributions while starting an entirely new propaganda campaign. They began publishing Second Amendment articles in their American Rifle magazine with the intent to reinterpret American history and define that the only regulations of guns should be an individual's inability to afford one. At the same time, they also began promoting the gun industry through advertisements. The 1972 Republican platform openly endorsed gun control, and in less than 8 years, it changed to, "We believe the right of citizens to keep and bear arms must be preserved. Accordingly, we oppose federal registration of firearms." It was here that the NRA gave their first ever presidential endorsement. In the early 1980s, the NRA released a brand new campaign called I Am the NRA. This campaign painted the diversity of NRA members, from an 8-year-old BB gun shooter, Roy Rogers, former astronaut Wally Schirra, to the former Dallas Cowboy cheerleader Joanne Hall. It was a huge success and allowed the NRA to become normalized as this American tradition. One of the biggest changes in the NRA's rhetoric came with the help of a report called The Right to Keep and Bear Arms. This report was completed by the subcommittee on the Constitution under the leadership of Utah Senator Orrin G. Hatch. It concluded that what they had uncovered was clear and long-lost proof that the Second Amendment to our Constitution was intended as an individual right of the American citizen to keep and carry arms in a peaceful manner for the protection of himself, his family, and his freedoms. This evidence was found right after the Republicans gained control of the Senate for the first time in years with the help of campaign contribution from the NRA's political arm, the Institute for Legislative Action. With the success of its I'm the NRA ad campaign and a public endorsement from former President Ronald Reagan, the NRA's membership had grown to 2.6 million, with a revenue of $66 million a year. They sponsored the McClure-Volkmer Act, which loosened the restrictions of the Gun Control Act of 1968, and it eventually passed. They fought against legislation trying to ban Teflon-coated ammunition, or cop killer rounds, and found themselves openly attacking police chiefs who were for gun control. The NRA ran political ads and sent direct mailers against these individuals in an attempt to attack them as opponents. The NRA changes up and leaves Knox behind. Enter Warren Cassidy. Knox was fired without notice and replaced with Cassidy because they felt he was too hard on Congress. There must have been lobbyists at the NRA whose zeal had occasionally gotten in the way of their common sense, Cassidy stated. The NRA began to feel it could accomplish more if they were not so aggressive. Under this new philosophy, the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986 was passed. It was considered a huge victory for the gun lobby, and especially the NRA. Many politicians said they only voted for it because of fear of the gun lobby's retaliation. However, the Second Amendment fundamentalists were furious with the late amendment that tightened restrictions on machine guns. This caused a decline in membership because too many of the hardliners felt that the NRA had gone soft. Clifford Knox called out the NRA as too compromising and wimpy. Such rhetoric has since been seen with the rise of the Tea Party and their uncompromising tactics against Obama. But this all changed when the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act was introduced. As a reaction to the attempted assassination of Reagan, it introduced a 7-day waiting period on gun purchases and a background check. The former NRA vice president replied, appealing to the patriotic aspect of gun ownership. What if there had been a Brady Bill 150 years ago? What if they had to wait 7 days to get their rifles to come to the Alamo and fight? This legislation pushed the NRA more to the right and increased its membership to all new levels. With the new members, a familiar face is re-elected, Clifford Knox. Compound this with their new vice president, Wayne LaPierre, and a very smooth-talking lobbyist with a PhD in political science, and the old NRA of no compromise is rebirthed. LaPierre knew how to talk to hardliners, and in 1993 said, "Good, honest Americans stand divided. driven apart by a force that dwarfs any political power or social tyrant that ever before existed on this planet, the American media. Next came an assault weapons ban in 1994. This fired up the NRA's base and increased the power of their rhetoric. Militia groups began to grow that touted anti-government views fueled by the federal raid at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, and the siege of agents in Waco, Texas. These incidents were spun to paint the government as the enemy of the people. After the 1994 midterm elections, the Democrats were voted out of the House in masses. But then came the bombing of a federal building by Timothy McVeigh in 1995. The NRA's anti-government rhetoric gained national attention, and a fundraising letter signed by LaPierre had been spotlighted. In the letter, it described that the new assault weapons ban as gives jackbooted government thugs more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure and kill us. It was at this time former President George W. Bush denounced his NRA membership, and former NRA President Richard Riley stated, "We were akin to the Boy Scouts of America, and now we cast with the zombies, the skinheads, and the Ku Klux Klan." By 2000, the NRA had become closely aligned with the Republican Party and fought to keep Al Gore from becoming president. It was in May 2000 that one of the most popular NRA slogans was coined. For the next 6 months, Al Gore is going to smear you as the enemy. He will slander you as a gun-toting, knuckle-dragging, bloodthirsty maniacs who stand in the way of a safer America. Will you be silent? I will not remain silent. If we are going to stop this, then it is vital for every law-abiding gun owner in America to register to vote and show up at the polls on election day. So, as we set out this year to defeat the divisive forces that could take freedom away, I want to say those fighting words for everyone within the sound of my voice to hear and to heed, especially you, Mr. Gore, from my cold, dead hands. Claim then President Charles Heston. The increase of wealth inequality. Sometime in the mid-1970s, wealth inequality began to rise, with the 95th percentile pulling away from the rest of the classes. There are three major reasons for this increase: the war on drugs/crime, the disappearing middle class, and changes in public policy. The war on drugs and the prison population. In the 1970s, the nation was given a new perspective about the drug epidemic. Nixon began this rhetoric by criminalizing drug addiction. Nixon viewed drug abuse as law-breaking hedonists who deserved only discipline and punishment. Instead of focusing on the factors that led to crime, Nixon focused national attention on the criminal. He was able to not only exonerate white middle-class families from the drug-related violence in inner cities, but also painted the public image of the drug user into one of the most dangerous and anarchic threat to American civilization. This is when we, as a nation, began to view incarceration for the nation's own good. With the focus on locking people up, the prison population began to rise at about the same time wealth inequality begins to rise. One possible reason for this is that more people locked up, the less people for tax revenue, and an increase in tax spending. The burden begins to shift to other classes. At a time in which Republicans are beginning to rise in power and influence, the wealthy were shifting their tax burdens downward to the middle class. With more and more lower class people in prison, who is left to fund the national budget? Step in Republican ideologies that want to reduce the tax burden on the American people. As more and more Americans are incarcerated through public policy, a problem is created, and the simple answer is reduce taxation for the working class. Lower taxation without cutting government programs leads to bigger deficits. What is the solution? Smaller government. A starve the beast tactic meant to reduce taxation for Republicans, but also accomplish the smaller government of libertarian philosophy. Both parties win by creating a problem through their party's philosophy and introducing policy to correct the problems that they originally created. The champions of this logic are put into power through the help of the NRA. The NRA dilutes the conversation by focusing only on Second Amendment rights and the fight for freedom and liberty. Its consumer base then votes for these principles while unknowingly voting for the policies that increase wealth inequality. So how does increased incarceration lead to increased wealth inequality? One major factor is that when individuals leave prisons, they have negative stereotypes attached to them. When they apply for jobs, a criminal record is a stain on their resume and has been shown to influence their ability to even get an interview or callback. Devah-Pager's experimental research has studied these employer perceptions by sending pairs of fake job seekers to apply for real jobs. In each pair, one of the job applicants was randomly assigned a resume indicating a criminal record. A parole officer is listed as a reference, and the criminal applicant was instructed to check the box on the job application indicating he had a criminal record. A criminal record was found to reduce callbacks from prospective employers by around 50%, an effect that was larger for African Americans than whites. If people who get out of prisons cannot find gainful employment, then how can they generate an income that will lead to wealth acquisition? Secondly, conditions of imprisonment actually promote behaviors and habits that are counter to the routine of regular work. Time in prison reduces work experience, and skills obtained before imprisonment are diminished. In the chart here, upward mobility of social classes is compared to those who have been previously incarcerated. The incarcerated group had the lowest mobility when compared to all other groups. The increased rhetoric of being tough on crime has undoubtedly led to an increase in wealth inequality. Our focus on treating criminals with punishment rather than rehabilitation has limited those convicted to their same social class and the generations that follow them. This problem was created by a reaction to the increase of crime during the 1980s and our failure to understand the complexities of crime. Since 1970, the middle class has been shrinking while the upper class has been growing. But who made up this middle class? From 1970, the middle class was mostly white, uneducated adults. Looking at this chart would explain why education wasn't as important. Manufacturing jobs were high-paying and needed little in education. However, when we look at today, the middle class is dominated by those who have at least an associate's degree or higher. As the job market demands a more highly skilled workforce, education begins to become a divisive factor of staying in the middle class. The middle class has been losing ground, while the bottom and top classes have gained enough to equal the middle class in numbers. Aggregate income has fallen for the middle class, risen for the upper class, and stayed stagnant for the lower class. Median income for all classes has risen all the way to about year 2000. Since then, all classes have decreased.